It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Grace Guo for this conversation with our students. Dr. Guo is an Associate Professor of Management and Associate Dean at Jack Welch College of Business and Technology, Sacred Heart University in the US. She earned her PhD in Organization Studies from University of Massachusetts, again in the US. She was the editor-in-chief of New England Journal of Entrepreneurship from 2014 to 19. Her research interests include entrepreneurship in emerging markets. She's originally from China, international migrant management, and indigenous Chinese management. Her academic work has appeared in leading journals and books, and she's been honored by many professional associations for her work, including the Academy of International Business. In terms of structure, I will start with some prepared questions and then we will open the floor for students' questions. Students are also welcome to type their questions in the chat box if they have connectivity issues. So welcome, Grace.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Vishal, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to have the morning Sunday conversation, my time zone or afternoon time in the students' time zone. It's my pleasure.
Thank you for taking the time and waking up early to talk to us. Can you share with the audience something about your current professional and personal life beyond what I already sort of described?
Yes, thank you for your introduction. I think you already gave everyone a quick idea that I'm Associate Dean of Graduate Programs Accreditation at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut, United States. So for those of you, I don't think many people know where's Fairfield. It's actually 1 hour north of New York City. So because of our location, we tend to get students, especially interested in financial and the banking industry. I'm also associate professor of management. As we're talking now, last week, I got informed that my application for promotion to full professor got approved by Board of Trustees. Thank you, last week. So officially, I will be full professor of management in September, but as of now, still associate professor. Sacred Heart University is a private Catholic university with, I want to say currently around 9,000 undergrad and grad students. So in my purview, I also oversee 8 master programs and 1 DBA program in finance. And I'm married with the 2 children. Vishal and I, we just chatted before you joined this call. William, 6-year-old, and Isabella, 2 years old. And life has been really challenging since pandemic because both have been studying from home. And my husband is a senior optical engineer and he works at ASML. It's a Dutch company and currently I believe it's the largest supplier in the world of, I'm going to say this wrong, so I'll give it a try. It's called photolithographer. Cannot say that, so don't even want to try, too early for me. I think it's a photolithography and system for the semiconductor industry. Because he's an engineer, I try not to argue with him because he always wears this shirt from Intel says, don't argue with the engineer because engineers is always right. So, so I will stop there. I think, as we chat more, I think, maybe I can share a little bit more of what I do for work and what I do in my personal life.
And I need to get that shirt from your husband so I can wear it in my house. And I'm an engineer by trade. And then hopefully my wife will not argue with me either.
That was convenient. Yeah, next time if you visit Intel in Silicon Valley, they have the Intel Museum. That's where I got the shirt for him.
Oh, good. So can you share briefly about your childhood? I'm assuming you grew up in China and maybe college and professional background before you got to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. I was, like you mentioned, I was born and raised in China by 2 engineers. So I learned at a young age why not to argue with engineers. And my father is also a successful businessman. He owns his own business in China in clean energy industry. So when I went to boarding school for 6 years between 12 and 18. And when I go up to college, and my major was actually in English literature with a minor in French. Years later now, I realized my French finally got a little bit of use because our current dean, she lived in France, and she actually came join us with a corporate background. So she was there for I want to say almost 20 years. So oftentimes she would slip the tongue and start speaking in French. I said, "Oh, finally, I realized, my French minor somehow helped me." But anyway, so fast forward, I came to the U.S. To pursue my MBA degree, like everyone here on call. And the original goal was to get some, business training and go back and help my father's business. That didn't happen because during my 2 years, during my MBA program, I got almost perfect GPA. And especially, I always get, I don't know, more than perfect score. Like if professor would give a bonus question, I would get the bonus question, right? So I almost get, I don't know why, but I almost get a perfect score, especially in my organizational behavior class, where the class average is about low 80. So my then advisor, now Dean of Spears College of Business at Oklahoma State University, told me and said, "Grace, I really see your great potential to do the PhD and to be in a doctoral program." I said, "What is PhD? I have no idea." So he kind of half serious, half jokingly said, "It's permanent head or hair damage." So I said, "Okay, all right." So here we go. Then I got accepted to UMass, University of Massachusetts, UMass Amherst, studied there. Within 4 years, I defended my dissertation. I think I'm still the record keeper of defending in the shortest time. And my dissertation topic was on organizational justice in China in a massive layoff situation. Remember, when I graduated, that was the time we went through the global financial crisis. And after that, I started my full-time job first as a visiting professor at Merrimack College in North Andover, just 20 minutes outside of Boston. And a year later, I accepted a full-time tenure track position at Sacred Heart University. I think now you know the rest.
Right. So you live and work in a country different from your native country, and it seems like that was not the original plan for you. And as you probably know, my story is kind of similar. It was not my either. But can you share with us why you made the decision to do so, and how do you look back at that decision?
Well, let me share a little story. I think, I take half step back of what I said. Was not my original plan. My original plan was not staying and working in the US, for career, but just, went for study. Yes, since I was little, I always had this dream. My mom used to tell me that one day I would study abroad, and very specifically in Paris. Now you sort of understand why I minor in French too. I have no idea. Ever since I can talk, and I always have this idea, would study abroad one day, but specifically in Paris. Maybe I was influenced by a popular TV show at the time in China, so I have no idea. So that started early on, and obviously, later on, I came to the U.S. and now almost 20 years later. And I feel like I remember the first day when I arrived in the US, I was by myself. By the way, I was the only child because I was born during China's one child, policy. So obviously I got overspoiled growing up, got a lot of individualized attention from both parents and the entire family. So I remember the day I arrived in the US, I was by myself, midnight, with 4 huge suitcases because my parents realized they need to wrap my life away. So instead of the typical 2 pieces allowed, they actually pay extra. So I got 4 pieces of, the huge suitcases. So it was the first time I had no help. First task was able to manage how to move those big suitcases up to the 3rd floor. I was staying at the university hotel because I was waiting to check in and to get in the dorm room set up. So starting that midnight, later on that first week, I learned how to set my first US bank account, how to set up my social, security and my student ID, how to register classes, and how to just learn how to even start taking a class and reaching out to a professor when I have questions. I must say it was very, very challenging. And especially when you're early 20s, obviously you know how to do a lot of things, but there's a lot of things you don't know how to do, especially you came from everything being set up for you, well pampered. Now all of a sudden you're thrown into the completely new world, no friends, no familiar faces, no familiar language, culture, etc., all by yourself. So I feel it was very challenging for first 6 months. I almost gave up, but I guess I didn't. And obviously there was some culture shock as well. I started realizing, oh, you can wear flip-flops to classrooms, that you can put your feet up on the table, and that is okay. And you can challenge your professor when you feel like they didn't say something right. I felt like that's really, that really blew my mind. I didn't know, well, you could do so much and so different. It was quite a shock. And I think there are many things that learn in the US. Obviously, all my business knowledge is acquired in the US. So that has become a calm these days. So sometimes I would get invited to speak to Chinese students. And I was a visiting professor at the University of St. Joseph in Macau. It was very hard for me to teach in Chinese because all my business knowledge was acquired in English. I do not know what is the Chinese version. I would go check that, look up in the dictionary, or first go through the Chinese version of the textbook, at least to know the jargon, and then I can teach. I think I can do it. It just not come naturally to me, even though I'm native Chinese speaker, because all my business education received in the US. And you need to know how to be independent. You need to know how to make decisions for yourself, because you're on your own. And from finding roommates, finding the house, and doing the grocery shopping, and basically you are fully responsible for yourself and for your education. So I think that itself says a lot. As someone leaves their home and then being thrown into the completely new culturally, I want to say, um, um, family wise, you're on your own now. Going forward, you're in control. You're making the decisions. I think you feel good, like you feel so empowered, but at the same time, it's challenging and scary at the moment.
Okay. Grace, there's so many commonalities between what you described and what sort of I went through. Someday maybe you and I can sit down over dinner or drinks and chat about those things. But here's my question that I thought of as you were speaking. You saw that you could put your feet up on the table in the class, but did you ever do that?
Not really.
Me
Still
neither.
today.
Okay.
Cannot do it.
Yeah, me neither. What, in your view, are some of the strengths of Chinese society and life, and what are some of the drawbacks
Yeah.
about living in China, the society?
Yeah, I can only speak, based on, I no longer spend much of my adult life in China anymore. So my years in China, when I was in my formative years, when I was a teenager, and then I came here in my early 20s. So just based on my observation, every year before the pandemic, obviously, I travel back to China because my family's still there. And when we had kids, we try to take the kids back to get them to expose to the culture and everything. So I really do believe if you ask me what is one strength of the Chinese culture or the society, is its focus on the community and what is the best for most people, either in a community or in a society or in that country. And most people in China, I believe, they are other-oriented, versus here in the US, most people, as you probably have learned about, difference between collectivist culture versus individualist culture. So most people in the US are very self-oriented. And I'm not saying one way is better than the other, it's just different. Meaning here in the US, people are more defined by their self identity, such as their unique characteristics, their personality, what they're good at, their talents. Versus in China, most people believe that their self-identity is being defined by their social rules, by their, whether they're husband, their brother, and their daughter, sister, and also partly by their organizational membership. What is your role in your organization? So there was a really there was an influential writer, and his work really influenced me during my study of indigenous Chinese management. And I can share with you, Vishal, and his name is Xiao Tongfei, and he wrote a very well-known book. It's called From the Soil, where he discussed, the unit of society in China versus, in the Western countries are very different. Here is individual based versus in China, it's by, it's small groups. So it's like the bundles. So you're not just individual, you're bundled in your small group, and small group, form the organizations form the society or the community. So this other orientation, I think, made people to make self-sacrifice if needed, to attain what is the best for most people in the society. And this was very evident during the pandemic. As some of you probably have been reading the news that, the COVID, now it's fully started in China during the Chinese New Year's time back in 2020. And then it was interesting to observe that the whole entire country with 1.3 billion people got back to normal. I mean, really normal, not wearing masks or anything by May that year. So at the one point, I felt lucky when this whole thing started. I was like, now I'm in the US. So, and at the time I was sending back masks to my families and friends, and also donated 300 masks to the local hospital. Where the faculty staff were fighting in the front line, they did not have all the medical supplies. Obviously, the supplies and equipment surged later on, but initially. But then in March, when our class, I believe, Vishal, your school is in the same situation. On March 11th, when our president announced, starting now, we're in pandemic mode, we're converting everything online, I went like, gosh, we're really living in a global world. Right? What happened in Wuhan, in China, in January or December, now 4 months later, it's everywhere. We had our patient zero or first case in Fairfield County. So, I think, when you reflect on, how did this country do to fight the pandemic and still, try to get to the other end of the situation, you realize maybe the collectivism or the other orientation, people are willing to sacrifice, to, give up their way to get out or enjoying their life. But, let's really do the lockdown. When they say the lockdown, it's really the lockdown. Each household was only given one ticket to do the grocery shopping or necessary business. And it's being closely monitored and tracked and everything. So still today, I think, there are not much of active cases in China, and you can imagine it's a heavily densely populated country. I think this could not have been possible without that other orientation, and people are willingly to self-sacrifice to attain the goal, whatever that goal is, for the whole entire society or country. So I think that's really prominent using the recent case. And in addition, I think Chinese people in general have great work ethics. They are taught at an early age that they need to work hard and put their best work, possible. And that also comes with good and bad. The good is that, they're willing to work hard, and which will help them to establish themselves in their professional life and their personal life. But also the con is that there isn't immediate gratification or the sense of indulgence. Like, the popular say in the US, as we show here oftentimes, especially for undergrad, is that I work hard, I study hard, but I also play hard, right? So in China, there's the second half. It's always the work hard. There's no play hard part. So that's also something new, and I appreciate when I first moved over to the US. I said it's okay. You don't have to feel so ashamed, like you partied all night after 2 months of hard study, and that is okay. So it has its own pros and cons, and then, like I said, it's a country with a lot of people, and the resources are not always there, so it's highly competitive. And meaning, if you need to achieve the same level of success here in the US back in China, you probably would have to work 2 times, 3 times, not even 10 times harder. So yeah, I
Now,
hope.
you also mentioned a book. So if you will share with me after that book, I can read it also and then also share it with the students. So
Yeah,
that's
it's a wonderful book. Yeah, would love
perfect.
to.
Now, to the next question. How is India viewed in China and by the Chinese people?
Well, I think most people, again, my answer to that will be, slightly influence, because I do have a lot of good friends, including Vishal yourself. They're from India, and my other good friend, I'm not sure if you know. I think you might know him, Sudhir Nair. So he's a associate professor at University of Victoria, and he and I we went through the doctoral program together. He was 1 year later than me, and currently I have a really good friend at work, and her name is Kathy Danda, and she teaches supply chain management, and she's a full professor and a colleague in my own department. So just to say that, I have a lot actually great friends from India, and most people I think view India as a country with a really long history, just like China, and a high level of pluralism, meaning in terms of culture, components, language, and religions. And I do believe actually, most Chinese people think, people in India are super smart and especially good at math. I don't know where's that coming from, but hence I guess that's why there are so many software engineers around the world from India. There must be some truth in there. I can attest that you and um, all the students here on call. And also, I think most Chinese people are very familiar with the Bollywood movies. And I think I grew up watching the Bollywood movies too. Couldn't really remember a lot of them, but my personal favorite still today is I may get this wrong, Slumdog Millionaire from a few years back. That was still my top movies up to these days. So I think, as we enjoying this global world, and to me I really don't think, well, sometimes I necessarily think um, the home culture, I do, but then again, because you work with almost like a global team, in my professional life, as Vishal knows, we have most of the times the global team authorship. You work with the professors and authors from across the country, um, different projects. And Vishal and I, we co-authored the paper. The very first paper we co-authored is actually a multi-country study um, on intellectual profiles for entrepreneurial development. And on that team, we had colleagues from Korea, China, India, Brazil, and I might have missed a couple. And you realize, with all those cultural differences, but people do share a lot of commonalities as well. And so I think that's also an interesting learning that I've gained since I step away from China and I'm in the US. And that is the opportunity for me to get exposed to people from different cultural backgrounds and really start learning how I can leverage, how I can learn from them, how I can leverage differences so we can achieve the common goal.
Perfect. Now, I think Kathy Danda you mentioned Kathy, and I think she has a sustainability textbook.
Yes, she does.
Used at some point when I was teaching sustainability. So
yes,
give her my regards. Tell her I said hello.
Will do.
And I
Will do.
communicated a little then.
Will do. That's her. Yeah.
So on that note, I will open the floor for questions from the students. Students, any questions?
Don't be shy.
They're usually good at asking questions. Students?
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Nishant Kumar.
Hi,
So I have,
Kumar.
ma'am, I have a question regarding generally it is observed that many of the MNCs from China, like Lenovo, Haier, and other companies firms, so they generally have a top hierarchy filled up with Chinese people, even though they are globalized all across the globe. But in the Western countries like Europe or America, they have Apple or Microsoft. They have people from all walks of life and different nationalities. So, what is the organization culture in China right now, and is it evolving?
Very good question. I think, it's an interesting question as company become more global, what is the impact on the global culture? And obviously, Lenovo now owns the personal computer division of IBM, right? So I think the country and the company itself is going through a lot of changes and transformation. If you ask me what is the organizational culture, um, that is based in China, I would tell you this is something that I discussed earlier, is that the family orientation and the family concept is really huge. And this is not very different from when you talk about the Korean culture, where people do believe, their organizational life is an extension of their family life. And it's very common that you see, if you go visit China, you will see, a younger person calling someone uncle or auntie where they're just strangers. So, because that is the custom, like you use the family title to refer to someone who's not even in your family. So in a way, this is telling you, and even the Chinese translation of the country has the family as part of the name of the country, if I translate directly. So in most of cases, you would see family has, the organization has become an extension of someone's family. And that's how you treat your people. And there's certainly a lot of, your employees expect you to provide a lot of care and protection in exchange of their hard work. And so in your observation, I think, it's a transition time. It's interesting to observe that how the organizations transform themselves as they become global. And some have become more open-minded and hire more non-Chinese people or employees. Some probably are still in the process of getting, I'm not saying getting used to, but, more synced with the global hiring practices. There are some other examples. For example, there is, not sure if Netflix is popular in India.
Yes, ma'am, it is popular.
Yeah, so if you go on to Netflix, and I highly recommend you watch what is called American Factory. So it's talking about a Chinese billionaire. They first opened up a factory in I'm losing the location, but if you looked up on Netflix, it's called American Factory, where the billionaire has to open up a glass, business in the U.S. He was actually lobbied by the governor to do that 3 times, and he did it. And then when he came over, Detroit, now I remember it was in Detroit. And then he realized that he had to handle, the workers' unions, and he had to manage the cultural differences. And it's a real story. It's a documentary. So watch it. It was as hilarious as, a good learning. So I think that could provide you with some really good updated understanding of, the clash between the modern and the tradition, the East and the West. I don't see the answer is yes or no. I think it come in different shapes and forms, and also up to the company's own organizational identity and culture, and what they perceive is the most important way to keep their core mission and tradition, but in the way to adapt to the rest of the world. So I highly recommend that documentary. Go watch it if you have some leisure time. It's a fun movie to watch anyway.
Thank you, ma'am.
So
No
Grace, I
problem.
wrote American Factory on my list to watch, and I'll certainly be watching it this week. Now, at some point, you said the Chinese translation of the country has the name of the.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So there are two Chinese characters for the country. So the first in Chinese called guo, that actually means country, if I translate directly. But the second, jia, actually translate directly to family. So it's actually country family. If I translate literally what is the country in Chinese to English, it's country plus family.
So the word country in English, when it's written in Chinese, has two characters.
Yes.
Which translates into country, the other into family.
Correct.
From a Chinese perspective, when they say American, America is a country, or Japan is a country, or France is a country, they think of the country as a family.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Other questions from the class?
Hello, ma'am. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ma'am, you are a person who has been experienced by the two political system, one in China and one in US. So from your perspective, ma'am, what do you think is a good political system for a huge population like China and India? Is it a single party rule which takes most of the decisions, or is it a democratic rule which we hear voice of everyone? And in which system do we see more development?
I think this is a very big question. The discussion may go beyond the scope of this current conversation. I didn't prepare to discuss politics in this class or in this conversation, but I do believe, if I say something broad, I think any political system needs to find its home and roots and the foundations in a specific, in a specific context. And I don't think, one party, two parties, it's a binary option one way or the other. I think you really need to look into what is the history and what is the political compositions and what is really the identity and the roots of the people in that specific country. And these days I try not to say, there's always one way is better than the other, because I think to me, they're just different. And to answer that question, you really need to into the history and what is the more proper way of handling what we call the democracy and, rights and many things related to that. So I think I'm trained as a scholar and I'm a critical thinker. Every time I hear something, I always doubt it. And every system, like every theory, has its own limitations. And so in that regard, I would not go in depth into that conversation, because I think, we can spend days and hours and just talking about that and debate on that. But I would say, when you learn things, when you acquire knowledge, when you hear things, always look into the contextual factors, because without the context, without saying, what exactly is the situation, overall context, you're looking into this phenomenon or the question at hand, it's almost meaningless. So whenever we talk about the system, political system, economic system, cultural system, you have to really think about what is the general, what is the overall context, what is the specific situation you have in mind to have a meaningful conversation. So I think that is the best I can say to keep this as a broad level. And so, with more time, I could probably elaborate a little bit more, but I think given the time, I think I will leave up to the audience here to really consider, in India, China, what is the cultural, compositions, what is the, historical compositions, what are people's core beliefs and values, and there are many other things. And I think, I would not necessarily say one way will support the development better or worse, faster or slower. I think all those factors need to take into consideration to fully answer your question. So that's just a start for you to start thinking and study more.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So Grace, I'll build on that question to ask this. Jogi, the student who asked you this question, is one of the good students in this class.
Yeah.
And if someone like him wanted to read in English, like a history of or a book about Chinese history or politics, which one would you recommend? These days we hear a lot of books coming out from the US on China, but my sense is they don't take a balanced perspective. Is there a good English language book that you would recommend to our students that would give them a balanced perspective?
Yeah, there are a couple of, yes, there are a couple of them. And again, you know, since my early 20s, been living and studying, work in the US. So obviously, you know, I'm a little disconnected, but I believe there are a couple of good ones, and I only know their Chinese name. I can look it up and see if they have the English version. I'll be happy to share along with the other book that I referred. And after the class, I'll be more than happy to do that.
Please, that would be very good, because I think students do need to be exposed to more sort of things from a Chinese perspective, given they hear a lot of things from the American perspective, and to some extent the British perspective on China.
Yep,
They
absolutely.
seldom get like the Chinese perspective because of, I guess, language or not enough English material coming out. Okay. Other questions from the class?
Good morning, ma'am. This
Good
is
morning.
Savik. Yes, ma'am. My question to you is like, if we see the present condition of situation of China, like it has almost like it has trade surplus with most of the countries over the globe. So for this particular reason, like we can see there are several protectionist policies that are being like majority of the countries are like sanctioning with China. So basically, what is your take on this particular issue? Like, do you think this kind of huge trade surplus, this is a very good for the bilateral ties, or like some kind of balance should be there? So what's your take on it?
Rephrase your question. I think it's a very broad one. I wanted to make sure I hear your question correctly. Are you referring to protectionism versus the bilateral trade?
Exactly. My question is that, like, if we see the present, like, maybe 2 years back also, Donald Trump had a very like trade war with China, right? So the major reason behind this was like US had around $500 billion trade deficit with China. So, so for this very reason, and if we check the majority of the bilateral ties between China and other countries, most of the countries have trade deficit with when it is compared to China. So that China is having a trade surplus. So is this a good thing considering like long lasting vision of like the relationship between the two countries, or like a kind of balance should be there? Because when it comes to exporting, China exports a lot, but when it comes to importing, it like it is somewhat goes for a conservative policy.
Yeah. I think, again, I think you have great students in this class, Vishal, and who ask broad questions. You know, I will try my best to address from a personal perspective. You know, I do not study political economics, and I believe I'm not expert, so I'll proceed with caution. And I think, in my view, the trade war, or the trade deficit, or in your question, I think, end of the day, you have to realize, with much of the protection, border protection, and sanctions that you imposed, I think end of the day, it's a global world. It's connected. And whatever way you go, you got to make sense, considering the competitive advantage of each country. So I'm sure you have learned, for example, because of the natural endowment, whether it's human or natural resources, certain countries will perform better in some industry sector. Very famous example would be, people most likely will prefer, I'm not sure if the groups here would drink French wine versus, German wine. And the reverse is true. People would prefer German car versus French car. So you get what I'm saying. So there is the country of origin, the COO effect. So, if you ask me, I think, I see more globally. It's all depending on, really having a fair understanding. What is the fair, share of the trade, depending on the country's competitive advantage. Obviously, several decades ago, you would say the Chinese participation in the world trade is probably in the manufacturing. So you would say you'll hear they speak made in China, and then in Trump's administration, you heard him saying, now I want all those manufacturing job back, and so they're all made in the USA. Whether that's the fantasy or that's that's really happening, I would have put a question mark, because there are certainly certain job is lost and then it's gone for good. You will never have them back. And I'm also saying having them back is not a good thing either, right? So it's all about redistribution, and it's all about who is good at doing what. So I would not limit my answer to either all or again. I think, through the recent pandemic, and we exposed ourselves to a lot of issues that we've never had before as a human society, especially in our global supply chain. And I would say there are a lot more opportunities for countries to work together in different fronts, different levels of collaboration. And funny, now you asked that question, because I think that China and the US are negotiating again of a new agreement as of this week. I don't think they had a good start, but somehow it ended up being to be a so-so, like a much better than when they started. So I'm waiting also to hear the development of how this will eventually, with Biden's new administration, how this will lead to a new political and economic arrangements between the two giants, the two countries. And so from that regard, I would say, it's neither. I think, it's really looking into, if you really look at things at a global level, is to understand where is the, where you can make most contributions. I think China has transformed its role from being known for manufacturing or being the manufacturing basis or factory for the whole entire world, is to this new slogan in China. It's called created in China, not just made in China. So, in the last 10, 15 years or 20 years, I think the country has invested a lot in terms of building the, not just manufacturing capacity, but also technology, new product development, and dynamic capacity. Many of the strategic management terms that you learned in class, actually the whole entire country has been investing heavily, have their own, home-based capacity, just to not replicate what's being brought from their joint ventures to China, but also really starting owning the knowledge, create the knowledge. So they do not want known for being the factory for the world, but also for the source of creation for the world. And it was funny because, when people think about all those biggest Asian inventions, the paper, the gunpowder, and campus, and other things, they all started in China. But, I think that has lost a little during the China's history. I think, the government is trying to, or the country trying to catch up. Sorry, my house is start getting noisy as kids are getting up. Like I said to Vishal, they slip in on Sundays. So
that's all right, Grace. But I will build on that question to ask you this. We hear a lot about sort of the American perspective on the trade war because, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever, right?
Right.
But we seldom get to hear sort of the Chinese perspective on the trade war. Can you maybe share maybe a short answer on what do you think is the Chinese perspective on the trade war?
I think the Chinese perspective, sort of related to what I mentioned earlier, is that, China has been only viewed as in one way, being the producer of the daily commodities. And in Chinese people's view, that's not really true. And that is not really what they think who they are these days. They want to be more going up of this, up of the stream. So we're not just the one who got the order and the produce, but also we can contribute much more and a higher level, in terms of the high technologies. And we want to own, the high technologies, and want to be in the center role. We're not just the ones, passively taking orders and manufacturing. So I think that has really changed, especially the younger generations. Again, not directly or indirectly related to the trade war. From them, this is almost signifies that we're being considered seriously as a serious, competitor in this global business world, because we are now for the first time, actually some of our products or ideas and creations may seem as, big threats. So from that perspective, I want to say there's a change of the self-realization. What is our self-value? What is our contribution to the global economic world in general? And I think there's a lot of national pride in that country now, and people do think our voice is louder, and we can talk more. So obviously, I think that is related to the recent negotiation between the Chinese and the US team, right? And because
it was fun to watch.
I know, and especially the translation part. So, and so I think, when you have that self-pride and when you have that more confidence, what you can say, when you can say no, obviously it's kind of funny, Chinese is a culture. People do not like to, to say no into someone's face, because that could loss of face. And people would say, we will see, or, I will think about it. You can take it as a soft no. But I think now I hear more no being said, in the political and economic situations, especially involving negotiation with the US administration. So that itself, it's interesting to observe over the last 10, 15 years. And it's interesting. I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but I think it's really interesting to observe how this will pan out going forward. But I think with the, again, I think they're all evolving. So the situation we're talking about here, the trade war or, the political system, they're not a thing, a chair or, a table you can touch and then they do not change. As the US change, as the rest of the world change, China change, I think it's going to be a constant dynamic fluid situation. And what we're discussing now is probably just really a snapshot.
Great. Other questions from the class?
Yes, sir. Good morning, ma'am. This is Pratik here. So my question is, in the last couple of months or some years, China has been majorly experimenting with the digital currency, and they've had some huge pilot projects going around in the country. So I wanted to know, what do you think is going to be the significance of the success or failure of such an experiment on the global money market?
I honestly would not be answering that question, because personally, I'm not invested into the digital currency world. So sorry, I don't think I will provide a good answer to that question. But I think the digital currency in general has been emerging worldwide. I think there needs to be better regulations. And as more people get involved in this, the new emerging, I want to say business sector. And it was funny because one of our recent new hire, the data manager that we have in assisting my accreditation work in my college, her son recently got hired at one of local, the big company. And it's a fancy, setup. And then she said, I could not describe what he does within less than 10 sentences. But I think it is a newest phenomenon in the horizon. And I think that is likely another, area for competition or maybe for collaboration across the country. But I do think also regulations as well. So again, I do not personally, spend a lot of time reading articles in that area, but it will be interesting to hear your perspectives or Vishal's perspectives on that.
No, thank you, ma'am.
Grace, I'll build on that question and ask a broader question, which is, from what I read, and admittedly, and I know no Chinese, so I don't read, Chinese newspaper articles, but what I read here is that China is investing a lot in sort of technologies of the future, artificial intelligence, as Pratik said, maybe digital currency,
Right.
vehicles. Could you maybe sort of comment, is there a strategic goal to these investments? What does China hope to sort of benefit from by doing these, investing in these technologies of the future?
Yeah, I think that that's really related to what I had said earlier, right? When we talk about the trade war, I do see that I want to say ever since the open door policy, right? And then the country really start taking off by first being the partner of the joint ventures brought in China by a lot of multinational corporations. And in my hometown, Chongqing in China, which is upstream of the Yangtze River, if I would compare to the US map, will be somewhere like Dallas. So it is one of the largest cities, most populated cities in China. And it's like Beijing, Shanghai, it's under direct administration of the central government. And my hometown is actually well known for being the automobile manufacturing basis. So we have Ford, we have Volvo, you name it, you can find it in my hometown. But I think, fast forward 20 years later, and the government realized we really didn't learn anything, because when you're in a joint venture arrangements, there are intellectual property protections, and they give you something, so you build up your manufacturing capacities, your knowledge in that area, but you don't really know the design, because that is being protected. You don't know. So you know the basics, but in order for you to progress to the level, so that's where I think, the Chinese government realizing, I want to say late 90s, early 2000s, say, we really need to take a leap, big leap, and meaning investment in that area is to invest into the technology for the future. We've done enough of a manufacturing, we know how to do things, but what's really lacking is the next step. So I think really starting them, you will find there's a huge emergence of the indigenous companies. Funny enough, that has somehow like the connection to the joint venture arrangements, and those are the indigenous Chinese companies, and many of them actually have the the government support. And what they're trying to build, it's not just helping the companies to starting themselves, but also building a network involving the university, research institute, and the companies, almost building an ecosystem. So with that help, the government intentionally invest in automobile industry, computing, capacity, like now AI and the technology for the future. So again, it's to respond that it's not just made in China. I think the country wanted to lead in the next wave of technology innovation by owning and being the creator, the original sources of information, that we own this piece of technology, and we can actually, use that as our competitive advantage when we negotiate our role with the rest of the world. And I think that the country has done that successfully, and you can read the news, and this is not just, the technology in one area. It's almost in all area, whether it's about exploring the outer space, whether it's about going deep down in the sea, whether it's about the AI, AI technology, whether it's about self-driving, whether it's about the computing, and whether it's about, well, the next thing I think it's about, this the competition over the computer chips, and that's actually my husband's what he's doing for his company, because they're leader in that area. So again, I think it's all being renegotiated and having investment in technology, and it's helping the country reestablish its role and how it's being perceived by its, I want to say, counterparts, or the competitors, or the collaborators in this global context. And it's been very interesting. I wrote a book, not an article with the two co-authors, and one of them, Vishal, you might know, Crystal Zhang, who's a professor at Brian University. we wrote a book about the Chinese government's role in corporate entrepreneurship development, and you'll realize that they started back in the 70s or 80s with the grabbing hand. We talk about government have different hands. They started with the grabbing, really, like, their presence is in every aspect of your life and your company and business life. And slowly they realized that's too much grabbing to be helpful. They really relaxed, and then to the point that are more of a helping hand. So we set up the infrastructure for you. We set up the innovative ecosystem for you. We help you connect with the universities, the top research institutes, but still it's your job to do your own work and to tell me where is the next breakthrough. And I've set expectations, but I'm all of like a little bit more backstage, and I'm not always in the front. So we've observed this transition in terms of the government involvement, which you cannot talk without when you talk about China. And we've seen it's taking, the backstage role more, even though it's taking the lead in setting all those things up and identify the initiatives and goals. But day in, day out, it's not like, decades ago, they're everywhere. Their presence is pervasive, but now they're more taking the backstage role and taking the more of a helping hand.
So Grace, can you share that article with us at some point, and I'll share it with the students so they can read it too on the topic that we just mentioned?
Absolutely. I think that's really pertaining to the question on technology, and it's a piece written on Chinese government's involvement in the automobile industry development in China for the last number of decades, where you can see, and what I've discussed, the change of the capacity development, and why the focus is being focused on more new product development, investing to the technology. It's being discussed there. It's a couple of years old, but I think still has relevant knowledge from the broader developmental perspective.
Great. Now, in the interest of time, I know I told you 45 minutes. We are already past an hour, so I'll move to the last question. And and my question is, you work with a lot of young people, students especially. What advice would you offer to our students who will be graduating soon to work in a globalizing world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I have a lot of advice, so it's hard for me to pick one. And if I can say one, if I can share one piece of advice, which I will use the old Chinese saying, reading 10,000 books is not as good as traveling 10,000 miles. When you're young, and be adventurous, be curious, and not afraid of trying new things. And I think that has really benefited me when I was probably in your age group, that when I was in my early 20s, that I took the first step to go abroad and study abroad. And at that point, I didn't think I would stay abroad for so long. But it's really the traveling part. I think, the wisdom in that old saying, reading the books is not as good as traveling 10,000 miles, because only through the traveling, you get exposed to different parts of the world, how people from different parts of the world, they work together to make new things and create the new inventions. And you will build the tolerance of the cultural differences. You will actually enlarge your horizon, and by seeing more, you can see more, because you understand more, you tolerate more. So it's really about immersing yourself into a new situation and breaking the misconceptions, and it's all about getting out of your comfort zone. So I think when I teach leadership, when you think about what is really the essence of leadership, it's about taking people out of their comfort zone, moving in the direction that the organization needs to be. I think we can afford a certain level of self-leadership. If you're being too comfortable in your comfort zone for too long, it's time to reflect, it's time to change, and it's time to try new things. And that's where the true learning and the true development will come from. Go see the world. That will be my final advice.
Great. On that note, Grace, thank you very much for your time today. And we truly appreciate your taking the time to come talk to the students.
You're welcome, Vishal. I look forward to connecting with you after this call, and with students, if there are any other follow-up questions, I will be happy to answer via emails. So enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your class. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Grace. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.